You need to leave.
Rain clung to her eyelashes like glass threads. Ree didn't blink. She couldn't. If she blinked, the world might collapse for good. The iron gates of the coal estate stood behind her, silent, expensive, cold. The kind of silence that didn't just keep people out but made them small for even trying to come close. Above, the night was heavy, a swollen bruise of gray clouds. The sound of rain against the marble steps was almost too gentle for what had just happened. She pressed a hand to her stomach. A sharp contraction curled through her spine. 39 weeks. She had whispered it to herself earlier that day, smiling at the mirror. 39 weeks. She was going to meet her son soon. Ethan's son. Their son. But now, Ethan's voice had already turned unfamiliar hours ago. Ethan Cole didn't sound like the man who used to brush the hair from her face after night shifts. He sounded like a boardroom. Like a verdict. He hadn't stepped into the rain. He'd just stood in the doorway in his black suit, framed by the golden warmth of the house they once picked nursery colors in. "My family knows everything," he'd said. "Everything," she whispered. "About your mother. About the fraud. About where you come from. That was never my crime. It doesn't matter. Ethan, I can't risk everything." Then he closed the door. Not softly. The rain swallowed the sound, but Ree felt it like a blow. She drew one uneven breath. And another. Then she doubled over, pain splitting through her lower back like a struck bell. The first flash of memory came uninvited. The smell of wet cedar from the garden hedges. Rain years ago. Her mother, Marjorie, laughing under a cracked umbrella. "Ree, storms don't scare strong women. They make us shine brighter." That was before the headlines. Before the arrest. Before Marjorie's name became a stain on every job application Ree ever sent. She had promised herself she would never end up back in the rain like that again. Yet here she was. Another contraction seized her. Her knees gave out. She collapsed onto the cold stone steps, the water soaking through her jeans. She gasped, clutching her belly. Somewhere behind the black-tinted glass of the parked car, Daniel saw. Daniel Rourke had been Ethan's driver for 6 years. He was quiet, methodical, and had learned early how to make himself invisible around men like Ethan. But when Ree crumpled on the steps, something old in him broke loose. A flash of his own past split the night. A hospital hallway, the sound of monitors flatlining, his wife Elise's hand slipping from his. That sound never left him. The door to the car flew open. Rain hit his face like pins. Ree heard boots on wet stone. "Ree." Daniel's voice was low, steady, the kind of voice that came from someone who knew storms too well. "Hey, look at me." She blinked up at him through rain and tears. She hadn't even realized she was crying. Her hair stuck to her cheeks, soaked. "I'll call an ambulance," he said, but he was already scooping her into his arms. She felt the strength in him, quiet, not the loud kind that boasted. He moved like a man who once carried someone and lost them anyway. "Daniel," she gasped, half in pain, half in disbelief. Why are you?" "Because you're not dying on these steps." The rain intensified, drumming against the hood of the idling car like a heartbeat. The hospital corridor smelled of disinfectant and burned coffee. Machines beeped steadily. Time stretched, elastic and thin. Ree's world blurred in contractions and memories. Ethan's hand on her stomach under a summer sun. "Promise me," she had whispered. "Promise me we'll be okay." He'd kissed her forehead and said, "Always." Now, the same forehead was cold with sweat. No Ethan at all. The nurse called out numbers. Someone adjusted in 4. Daniel stood in the corner, drenched shirt clinging to his shoulders, fists tight, jaw locked. He hadn't left. Not even when she screamed. Especially not then. Hours later, in the hush after the storm of birth, Ree heard the baby's cry. It was sharp, alive, angry at the world, just like she had been once. They laid him against her chest. Warmth bloomed through the cold. Her eyes blurred again, not with pain this time. She turned her head slightly. Daniel was still there. Eyes red. A shadow of something softer passing through his expression. Maybe memory. Maybe promise. She didn't know why he stayed. She only knew he did. In the corner of the hospital room, a photograph lay on the table, Ethan and Ree at the lake house last spring. His hand on hers. Her hair caught by sunlight. A promise frozen in pixels. She looked at it once. And then she looked at her child. The photo no longer felt real. But the heartbeat against her chest did. Outside, Dawn began to wash the sky in bruised lavender. Rain still whispered against the window, a lullaby only she and the storm could hear. And somewhere in her chest, beneath the exhaustion and the wreckage, a thin, unfamiliar thread of clarity tightened. He had shut the door. Daniel had opened one. Ree presses her baby close as Daniel steps into the hallway, leaning against the wall, soaked, silent, and changed. Rain light spills through the window. On the nightstand, the old photograph curls slightly at the edges from the damp air. A door had closed forever. Another, not yet named, had just begun to open. The first thing Ree remembered about Ethan Cole wasn't his money. It was the way he knelt. It was a Tuesday night, trauma ward, end of a brutal shift. She'd been running on burnt coffee and grit when a little girl came in after a highway crash. Her mother's cries had filled the hall like something sharp. Ree was holding pressure on a wound, voice steady even though her arms ached. That's when she saw him. Not the polished billionaire from the papers. Not the man in tailored suits with cameras in his shadow. Just Ethan, sleeves rolled up, standing quietly in the corner of the ER. When the girl's mother broke down, he stepped forward, crouched, and took her hand. "We'll cover everything," he'd said softly. No cameras. No grand gestures. Just a man who looked like he meant it. Ree hadn't wanted to notice him. But kindness like that cuts through exhaustion. It plants itself somewhere it shouldn't. Later, she'd found him sitting in the cafeteria, drinking hospital coffee that tasted like burned tires. He'd smiled when he saw her. "You didn't even blink back there," he said. "That's my job," she'd answered, flat but not unfriendly. He tilted his head. "No, that's hot." She'd rolled her eyes, but the corner of her mouth betrayed her. It was the first time she'd smiled in 3 shifts. He offered her half of a dry blueberry muffin, and for some reason, she took it. That was how it started, not with fireworks, not with flowers. Just 2 people sharing bad coffee at midnight. A week later, he came back. Not with a donation team, not with reporters. Just Ethan. She'd been charting vitals at the nurse's station, hair escaping its bun, when he leaned against the counter. "I figured you'd still be here," he said. "You don't know my life." He grinned. "I'm learning." She hated how easy it was to talk to him. How he listened without that glazed-over politeness rich men carried like a badge. She told herself it was just small talk. She didn't see the quiet trap of hope forming around them. Spring turned to summer. He started walking her to her car after shifts. Sometimes he brought takeout, nothing fancy, just hot noodles, shared from one container because neither of them cared about neatness at 2 a.m. He liked to ask her questions no one else did. "What scared you when you were a kid? Where would you go if you weren't here? What's your favorite sound in the world?" "Rain," she said once. "But only the kind that sounds soft, like it's asking permission." "Good answer," he'd whispered. The lake house came later. He drove her up there one warm weekend in June. She almost didn't go. The gap between their worlds was too big. But he insisted. "It's just water and wood," he'd said. "Not a palace." She'd laughed when they arrived. It was absolutely a palace, glass walls, white oak floors, a view that made silence feel holy. But it wasn't the house she remembered most. It was the way he took her hand as they stood on the PO at sunset. "You don't have to keep running," he told her. She stiffened. "I'm not running." "Yes, you are," he said softly. "You don't trust good things to stay." "Good things don't," she shot back. He looked at her like he was trying to unlearn something the world had drilled into him. "I'll prove you wrong." She wanted to laugh. Instead, she let him pull her closer. They made love for the first time that night, wrapped in soft sheets, with the sound of rain against the lake house windows. It wasn't the wild kind that shatters you. It was slow, unhurried. It felt like someone pressing warmth into a place that had been cold too long. Afterward, she lay with her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat. He traced lazy shapes on her wrist. "This is it," he whispered. "I want you. Us. A real life." Her throat tightened. No one had ever said those words to her without conditions. She wanted to believe him. So she did. She got pregnant 3 months later. When she told him, she half expected panic. Instead, he dropped the spatula he was holding. They were cooking dinner in his ridiculous designer kitchen, and pulled her into his arms. "We're going to have a baby," he kept saying, like a prayer. "Then, we're going to be a family." It was the first time in her life she felt like she was part of something built with someone, not just around them. He painted the nursery himself. Badly. He wasn't good with a roller, but he was worse at giving up. She remembered laughing so hard she cried as he tried to explain why the ceiling now had mint green streaks. "We're a mess," he'd said. "A beautiful mess," she'd replied. "But cracks don't start loud. They whisper first." The first whisper was his mother. She came to the hospital fundraiser in pearls sharp enough to cut glass. Her smile was all sugar, her handshake ice. She pulled Ree aside, just long enough to say, "You're a lovely girl. I hope you understand what this means for him." What it meant, not who she was. Ree had smiled, but a chill had slipped under her skin and stayed there. Ethan didn't see it. Or maybe he chose not to. Then came the dinners. The subtle comments. "Our family has a reputation. She's strong, but where is she from again?" It was always where she was from, never who she was. Ethan began to cancel dates, late meetings, sudden trips. When he did show up, he carried a new kind of tension in his shoulders. He still held her, but his touch wasn't as easy. It was cautious, negotiated. And when she talked about their child, he stopped saying we. He started saying I. "I'll make sure the baby has everything," he said one night. "We will," she corrected. "Of course," he said too fast. That's when the silence began to grow between them. There were still moments that fooled her. The night it rained soft and steady, the lake house wrapped in mist. He pulled her outside barefoot, her belly rounding against her shirt. He pressed his forehead to hers and whispered, "I'll always open the door for you." She'd laughed, breathless. It was a movie line. It felt safe. That was the night she decided to love him completely. But love is not a shield. And the world Ethan came from did not want her. It wasn't one moment that broke them. It was a slow, careful undoing. The way he began to defend their whispers. The way he said it's complicated more often than "I love you." The way his promises began to sound like apologies. When his family found out about her mother's past, their reaction was immediate. And Ethan's reaction, just as quick. Not rage. Not protection. Just fear. "I need time," he'd said. "This is bigger than us." She had stood in his kitchen, clutching her mug, feeling the ground beneath her shift. "Bigger than our child." His silence had been the answer. He still said all the right words for a while. "I love you. This doesn't change how I feel. We'll figure it out." But his eyes didn't match his mouth anymore. And she learned long ago that when people stop looking at you while they speak, they've already chosen a different future. The last good night they had together, it rained. Not soft, not hard, just steady. A rain that wrapped around the lake house like a lullaby. They sat on the porch, her legs over his, her hands on her stomach. He rested his chin on her shoulder, quiet. "Do you still believe in forever?" she asked. He hesitated, just for a second. But she felt it. "Yes," he said, but forever was already cracking at the edges. When she looks back on that time now, it's not the mansion or the lake house she remembers. It's the little things. His bad coffee in paper cups. The way he hummed tunelessly when he thought no one was listening. The way his thumb fit perfectly against her wrist. The stupid green streaks on the nursery ceiling. She doesn't remember the money. She remembers believing. Believing that someone would choose her, stay. That's what made it hurt. Not that he left, but that once, he made her believe he wouldn't. The baby slept in the bassinet by the window. Rain still whispered against the glass like it hadn't taken a single breath since last night. Ree sat upright in the hospital bed, arms wrapped around herself, as if holding in everything that threatened to spill out. The four was gone. The monitors silent. The scent of sterile cotton and lemon cleanser clung to the room, almost too clean for how broken everything felt. The nurse had offered to call someone. Ree had said no. Someone. The word itself hurt. She pressed her palm against the linen sheet. A thin, circular bruise marked where Ethan's engagement ring had sat for months. She'd taken it off at the end of her second trimester when her fingers began to swell, promising herself she'd slip it back on after the baby. Now it sat in a paper bag with her hospital paperwork. She stared at the bruise. The ring had left its mark even after it was gone. "Your discharge will be this afternoon," the nurse said softly from the doorway. "Do you have anyone picking you up?" Ree lifted her gaze. Her throat ached, dry and raw. "No." A quiet pause. A soft nod. Then the nurse left. Lemon cleanser. It reminded her of Ethan's kitchen that first night. Autumn. She'd been working the late shift. He'd offered her soup, actual homemade soup, though he burned the onions. "I don't cook often," he'd said, embarrassed. "You're a billionaire who can't chop an onion," she'd teased. "Not everyone's perfect like you, Ree." He'd looked at her like she was something new. That was the night she'd believed she could be loved without being doubted. That night, lemon and rosemary had smelled like hope. Now, it smelled like the clean edge of loss. She gathered the small pile of clothes on the chair. No designer maternity wear. Just worn jeans and a rain jacket with a frayed zipper. Her baby, their baby, wore a hospital-issued Odyssey with little blue stars. She'd thought she'd be bringing him home to a nursery with pale green walls, a rocking chair, and a window overlooking the lake. But she had no home to bring him to anymore. Daniel appeared at the door. His shirt was clean now, his hair damp from a quick shower in the staff facilities. He stood with the careful stillness of a man who had learned not to push past someone's pain, just to wait until they let him in. "I can drive you," he said simply. "Why?" "Because you shouldn't walk out of here alone." Outside, the parking lot was slick and shining. The storm had passed, but the air was still heavy with the aftertaste of rain. Daniel opened the passenger door of the sedan and waited. Ree tightened her grip on the baby carrier. She felt the weight of her son against her arm, light and heavy at the same time. She slid into the seat. Daniel didn't speak as he started the engine. Only the windshield wipers filled the silence, a rhythmic, stubborn sound, sweeping away what kept trying to fall. The first time she saw Ethan Cole wasn't at a gala or fundraiser. It was in the trauma ward. She'd been on shift for 16 hours straight. A little girl had come in with a head injury from a highway accident. Ree had stayed past her clock-out time to stabilize the child. Ethan was there with his foundation's team, offering to cover the family's medical costs. But what she remembered wasn't the money. It was how he knelt beside the girl's mother, held her hand, and said, "You're not alone. We'll take care of you." When their eyes met across the hallway, she had believed he meant it. Back then, Ethan Cole was the man who stood in the rain for strangers. She never imagined he'd shut the door on her. The car turned into a small, older neighborhood, narrow streets, peeling paint, the kind of place where dreams learned to live quietly. Daniel pulled up in front of a brownstone apartment with ivy creeping up the walls. "It's not much," he said, "but I've got a spare room. Just until you figure things out." "I can't," she began. "You can," he interrupted gently. "It's just a roof. Not a promise. You need rest. So does the baby." Rain dripped from the car roof, steady as breath. She swallowed hard. "Just a few days," she whispered. He nodded. No pressure. Just a door left open. Spring. A lake house with glass walls. He'd brought her there to meet his family. She'd worn a pale blue dress she couldn't afford but loved anyway. Ethan had stood behind her on the pier, his hands resting on her growing belly. His mother had smiled politely, too politely. Someone had taken a photograph at that moment. Sunlight glinting off the water like coins, wind lifting her curls. "This is forever," Ethan had whispered into her hair. But forever had an expiration date. She found the photo again in her bag that night. It was bent at the corner now. She stared at their faces until the edges blurred. Daniel's apartment was simple. Clean. A faint scent of cedar and coffee hung in the air. A clock ticked somewhere in the background. There were books on the shelf, medical memoirs, a cracked copy of The Old Man and the Sea, a framed black and white photograph of a woman holding a newborn. She noticed the photograph before she noticed Daniel watching her notice it. "Your wife?" she asked softly. His eyes flickered. A shadow passed over them, quiet but deep. "Yes, Elise. She's..." He nodded once. No words needed. Grief recognized grief. Ree put the baby down in the crib Daniel had pulled from storage. It was old but sturdy. There was a tiny lullaby mobile hanging above, faint paint peeling from years of silence. When she wound it once, the music was soft, cracked with age, like a memory replaying itself too many times. Daniel stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets. He didn't offer empty comfort. That was something she hadn't realized she needed, silence that didn't demand. For the first time in days, she let herself exhale fully. But peace never stays long. 2 nights later, Ethan's name appeared on her phone screen. The sound of the ringtone shattered the cam like a plate hitting tile. Her hand shook as she picked it up. "Ree," he said, "we need to talk." "Now you want to talk?" "It's not that simple. My family, this is bigger than you think. Bigger than your child." "I didn't say that." "You didn't have to." The silence after that felt like a verdict. "We'll sort something out. I'll take care of the baby. Financially. My son doesn't need your money. He needed his father." She hung up. The phone slipped from her hand. Her breath came short, tight. Outside, the rain started again. Not a storm this time. A soft, persistent drizzle, like the world itself refusing to let her heal too quickly. Daniel found her sitting on the floor against the wall, arms wrapped around her knees. He didn't touch her. He just slid down the wall beside her, close enough that she could feel someone there. "Don't say it gets better," she whispered. "I don't want lies." "I wasn't going to," he replied. She looked at him then. Not through him. At him. The lines around his eyes, the quiet steadiness, the ache he didn't hide. That was the night Ree cried without shame. Not for Ethan. For everything. Ree, 16, sitting in the back of a courtroom. Her mother in handcuffs. Rain outside. The smell of wet wool. The judge's gavel. The whisper of neighbors. That family. Of course. She'd promised herself she would build something that couldn't be taken away. But Ethan had shown her how easily everything could be. 2 weeks later, the letter arrived. Family court. Custody hearing. Ethan was coming for their son. Her hands trembled as she held the envelope. She hadn't even fully recovered yet. She could still feel the ache of childbirth in her bones. Daniel found her standing in the kitchen, letter unopened, breathing too fast. "You don't have to fight alone," he said. "I don't have a choice." "That's not what I said." She met his eyes. Something steady lived there. Not promises. Not pity. Just ground. That night, she took the photograph out again. This time, she didn't stare at Ethan. She stared at herself, the woman she'd been when she believed forever was real. She folded the photo in half. Rain beat against the window, relentless. Daniel Rourke had spent most of his life learning how to take up less space. People saw him, but they didn't really see him, the driver in the crisp black jacket, standing straight by the car, always a few steps behind other people's stories. It was easier that way. After Elise, he didn't want to be seen. He wanted to disappear in plain sight. Elise had died on a rainy night too. Labor came too early, too fast. The doctors said there wasn't time. He'd held her hand as the monitors flatlined, feeling her fingers slip through his like sand. Their daughter never cried. Elise never opened her eyes again. In the years after, Daniel didn't speak much. He worked. He drove. He built his days like walls, quiet, smooth, impenetrable. He didn't feel anymore. Feeling was how you got broken. Until the night he saw Ree on the steps. She was curled on cold stone, clutching her stomach, rain hitting her face like the world itself was punishing her for hoping. He didn't think. He didn't weigh consequences or positions or who she belonged to. He just ran. And for the first time in years, his heartbeat wasn't just a sound in his chest, it was a call. The days after Elijah was born unfolded softly, without announcement. He told himself he was just helping, a spare room, a ride, a steady hand. But it wasn't help. It was presence. She didn't ask him to save her. She didn't need him to. He learned her silences before her words. She brewed her coffee too strong, like she didn't trust softness. She checked Elijah's breathing every hour at night, like love itself might vanish while she slept. She smiled rarely, but when she did, it lit the room with something so fragile and fierce that it made his chest ache in places he thought were long dead. Daniel had loved once like a man convinced he'd get a lifetime. With Ree, it was different. It was quiet. It grew not from promises, but from small, unremarkable moments that stuck. The first time he felt it was on a Tuesday. She had fallen asleep sitting upright on the couch, Elijah tucked against her shoulder, a half-empty bottle on the coffee table. The rain tapped gently against the windows. He leaned against the doorway, watching. She wasn't performing softness. She just was. And something in him, the part that had been locked up since Elise, exhaled. They never talked about love. Not then. Their conversations were simple, about the baby, the weather, the dull small things that hold broken people together. But beneath each word was the sound of two lives trying to relearn trust. She cooked in the evenings sometimes, brow furrowed in concentration like she had to prove to herself she could build a home from scratch. He'd lean against the counter, pretending not to watch her humming under her breath. She never sang fully, just the barest outline of a melody, like a ghost of something she once loved. One night, Elijah began to cry in that sharp, newborn wail that cuts through sleep like glass. She jolted awake, but Daniel was already there, holding the baby to his chest. He whispered to him softly, the same lullaby Elise used to hum, cracked and frayed but still there. Ree watched from the doorway, hair tangled, exhaustion painted under her eyes. But for the first time in weeks, she wasn't afraid. Watching Daniel hold Elijah, she saw something steady. Not the fragile forever Ethan promised. Something quieter. Something real. She didn't fall for him in a single moment. She grew toward him. It was in the way he always paused before touching Elijah, reverent, gentle. The way he gave her silence without making it feel like absence. The way he learned when to speak and when to just be there. Daniel never made grand declarations. He fixed the broken crib hinge without being asked. He walked Elijah at 3 in the morning when she couldn't keep her eyes open. He showed up, again and again. And in her chest, something that had been frozen for too long began to thaw. The first time their hands touched wasn't romantic. She was holding a mug of tea, and he was reaching to steady it before it fell. Her fingers brushed his, and for a moment, the world went silent except for the soft patter of rain outside. No fireworks. Just the quiet shock of safety. She pulled back too fast, breath caught. He didn't chase the touch. He just looked at her, really looked, and nodded like he understood. That was Daniel. No pressure, no demands. Just a quiet place to land. Months slipped by like river stones. Smooth, slow, inevitable. She began to trust his laugh, rough-edged, rare, but honest. He began to trust the way she said his name like it belonged to this version of him, not the broken one he used to be. One late winter night, she found him sitting on the floor by Elijah's crib. The baby had fallen asleep hours ago, but Daniel stayed, elbows on his knees, head bowed. "You okay?" she whispered from the doorway. He didn't look up. "I used to sit like this, with Elise, before everything went wrong." She crossed the room slowly, barefoot on cold wood. She sat beside him without asking. Their shoulders brushed, tentative, but steady. "I didn't think I'd ever be in a room like this again," he said. She didn't say anything. She just leaned against him, not in pity, but in understanding. In that quiet, something unnamed passed between them. Not love as in falling, love as in arriving. They kissed for the first time in the spring. It wasn't planned. Elijah had just fallen asleep after a long night of teething. The rain was soft against the kitchen window, steam rising from mugs on the table. She reached for the sugar, he reached for the same jar. Their hands brushed. They looked at each other, breath tangled in the soft hush. For the first time, neither of them pulled away. He cupped her face with hands that had once lost everything, and she let him, because this time it wasn't about being rescued. It was about choosing to stay, choosing each other. The kiss was slow, careful, a promise that didn't need to be spoken. Daniel was not the man who burst into her life with fireworks. He was the man who stood in the rain without leaving. The man who held the child of another man without resentment. The man who loved like a quiet lighthouse, steady, unshakable. And who once built her hope on promises that crumbled, found something far rarer in him. A love that didn't need to be loud. Just true. The lullaby mobile played a cracked, fading melody as dawn crept through Daniel's kitchen window. It was one of those soft, pale mornings when the world felt too still, like something was holding its breath. Ree stood barefoot on the cold tiles, cradling her son, Elijah, against her shoulder. His tiny breath warmed the hollow of her collarbone. She rocked him gently, watching the thin line of rainwater tracing down the glass. The letter from Ethan's lawyer lay open on the table, a clean sheet with dirty intentions. Daniel entered the kitchen quietly, wearing a faded gray hoodie and the weight of someone who had been awake long before sunrise. He set 2 mugs down, one with coffee, one with warm milk. "Morning," he said softly. "Morning." Her voice rasped from disuse. She hadn't realized until now how much she'd stopped speaking lately. He poured a spoon of sugar into her cup. She watched the white crystals swirl and dissolve. For a long moment, neither of them said anything. Finally, "He's not going to let me keep him," she whispered. "Ethan, he's going to drag us through court, through everything. He has money, lawyers, people who fix things." Daniel leaned his elbows on the table, quiet as always. He didn't rush to contradict her. Didn't say you'll win or he can't take your child. Instead, he asked, "Do you want to fight him?" She looked at him, startled. "I don't have a choice." He shook his head slightly. "That's not what I asked." Her breath hitched, because the truth she hadn't said out loud yet was this. Part of her was still bleeding, not just from what Ethan had done, but from the jagged edges of what they'd once been. "I want to keep my son," she said finally. "I want a life that's mine." Daniel nodded once. "Then we fight." He said it the way other people said breathe. That night, while Elijah slept in the crib and rain whispered outside, Ree found Daniel on the balcony. He was sitting on an old wooden chair, a chipped ceramic mug between his palms. She hadn't meant to interrupt him. But he looked up, and something in his expression was unguarded, a kind of quiet that wasn't emptiness, but memory. She leaned against the doorframe. "You don't talk about her much." "Elise," he said, almost smiling. "There isn't much to say that doesn't sound like a ghost story." Ree waited. "She died during labor," he continued softly. "Preeclampsia. The doctors, they tried. I was holding her hand. Thought I could keep her here if I held on tight enough." The rain was louder now, hitting the tin gutter like a heartbeat. "She was 27, he added. "We were supposed to name our daughter Grace." Ree's breath caught. She hadn't known the details. Only the silence. "Why are you helping me?" she whispered. He stared at the rain. "Because no one should face a storm alone." Over the next days, their rhythm grew quieter, steadier. Morning, feeding Elijah, walking him in the park. Afternoon, calls with a legal aid attorney Daniel had found, a woman named Marissa who worked pro bono. Evenings, the cracked lullaby mobile spinning as they sat at the kitchen table, planning, breathing. Daniel didn't hover. He didn't try to fill silence with words. He simply existed like a wall against the wind. But there were moments, brief, invisible to everyone but them, when their edges brushed. His fingers accidentally brushing hers as he handed her a bottle. Her laugh, the first real one in weeks, when Elijah tried to grab Daniel's beard. The way she found herself listening for his footsteps in the hallway at night. The kind of small, quiet things that don't announce themselves as love. They arrive softly, like rain before a storm. The custody preparation was brutal. Ethan's team filed motion after motion. He claimed she was unfit due to family background. That her mother's record, despite being not hers, suggested instability. He demanded full custody. The attorney, Marissa, sat in Daniel's kitchen one night, tapping her pen against a folder. "He's trying to bury you in paperwork," she said. "And if he gets the right judge, this could get ugly." Ree clenched her jaw. He's never even held Elijah. "That's not what this is about," Marissa said gently. "This is about control." Daniel leaned forward. "What can we do?" "Build a wall of truth," Marissa replied. "She's a nurse, stable employment history, clean record. Character witnesses. Support system. Everything that proves Elijah's best interest is with his mother." Ree laughed bitterly. "Support system. I don't have one." Daniel's gaze didn't waver. "Yes, you do." She turned toward him, and in that moment, something in the room shifted. A silent line was drawn, invisible but strong. Days bled into nights. Ree began to heal in fragments. Not in cinematic, triumphant bursts, but in the tiny domestic moments she never thought she'd have again. Feeding Elijah on the balcony while the rain whispered on the roof. Folding little blue onuses on Daniel's couch. Watching Daniel hum to the baby, a lullaby she didn't recognize, soft and cracked. She began to remember herself not as a woman who was left, but as a woman who was still here. But Ethan wasn't staying gone. One night, just past midnight, a car engine cut through the rain. Headlights swept across Daniel's living room. Ree froze. Elijah stirred in his crib. Daniel moved before she could. He was at the door in seconds, posture rigid. The man standing on the porch was exactly who she feared. Ethan Cole. He wasn't in a suit this time. Jeans. A raincoat. His hair damp. He looked almost human, but his voice still carried the arrogance of someone who believed the world would always bend to him. "Ree," he said. "We need to talk." Daniel stepped into the doorway. "You need to leave." Ethan's jaw tightened. "I'm not talking to you." Ree's pulse thudded in her ears. The baby started crying upstairs, that raw newborn cry that slices through everything. Ethan tilted his head toward the sound. "My son." Something in Ree snapped at the way he said "my." "You lost the right to say that," she said quietly, stepping forward. Her voice was soft, but steady. His eyes flicked over her, over the house, the worn walls, the creaking porch. "You really think this," he gestured around, "is where he belongs?" Daniel's fists clenched, but he didn't speak. Ethan leaned closer, lowering his voice. "You can't win, Ree. You know it. Come back before it gets ugly." She stared at him, every memory, every promise, every soft lie, unraveling at once. "No," she whispered. The rain hit harder against the porch roof. Ethan's smile was thin. "Then I'll see you in court." He turned and walked into the storm. The taillights vanished into the wet dark. Inside, Elijah still cried. Ree climbed the stairs with shaking hands. She picked him up, pressing him to her chest. Her breath synced with his tiny sobs. Daniel stood at the bottom of the stairs, watching. Not intruding. Just steady. She met his eyes. Something unspoken passed between them. Not a declaration. Not yet. But something real. Rain no longer sounded like abandonment. It sounded like a clock, steady, inevitable. A rhythm she had learned to live with. It had been 42 days since Elijah was born. 30 since Ethan appeared on the porch. And 17 since Rhys stopped waking up in the middle of the night expecting the door to slam again. Daniel's brownstone had become something she hadn't expected, a home that didn't demand anything in return. No contracts. No vows. Just a place where she could breathe again. The living room smelled like cinnamon and wet wood. Daniel had started making cinnamon oatmeal in the mornings, claiming Elijah liked the smell. Rhys had laughed the first time he said it, but now, the warm, sweet scent had rooted itself into their mornings like a quiet ritual. Rhys sat on the couch, Elijah sleeping against her chest, the late afternoon light painting soft gold across the walls. Daniel was fixing the old lullaby mobile upstairs. She could hear the faint clink of screws, the gentle thump of him moving carefully in the small room. It wasn't the lake house with polished glass and wealth dripping from the walls. But it was real. And real, she'd learned, was better than beautiful. That afternoon, as Elijah stirred, she began to hum. The lullaby wasn't one she learned from a music box. It was one Marjorie used to sing, low and rough, off-key, but warm. She'd sworn she'd never sing it. Her mother's voice was too tangled with shame, with the trial, with everything they'd lost. But as Elijah's tiny fingers curled around the fabric of her shirt, the melody slipped out before she could stop it. Quiet. Threadbare. Real. Flashback. Rain. Rhys was 15. Marjorie had been arrested the next morning. That night, her mother sat on the floor of their tiny kitchen, hair wrapped in a scarf, singing that same lullaby under her breath. Rhys had hated her then, hated the way love could feel so small, so powerless against the weight of the world. She didn't hate her anymore. Now, she understood, that song wasn't surrender. It was a promise to keep breathing when everything else had been stripped away. The next morning, Daniel walked into the kitchen as she was making Elijah's bottle. His hair was a mess. He'd been up half the night working overtime at the garage. He didn't say good morning. He just grinned faintly at the sight of her in his old hoodie. "You've officially stolen my favorite sweatshirt," he said. She smirked. "I'm keeping it." Can't argue with that. Their banter was easy now, not forced, not careful. The kind that grows when silence is no longer a threat. Later, they went for a walk through the small park a few blocks away. The air smelled like wet leaves and hot pretzels from a nearby vendor. Elijah slept soundly in his stroller, his tiny hat bobbing with every bump in the pavement. Children played on the swings. A dog backed. A train whistle blew faintly in the distance. Ordinary life, the thing she thought she'd lost forever. Daniel watched her laugh as Elijah kicked his feet in his sleep. For a moment, he saw not the woman left in the rain, but the woman she had become despite it. "Hey," he said softly. "You're doing good." She turned, surprised. "What? You? Him? All of this?" He nodded at the stroller. "You're stronger than you think." She looked down at Elijah. "I don't feel strong." "Strength isn't a feeling," Daniel said. "It's just staying." Flashback. Daniel and Elise. 6 years ago. Hospital hallway. Elise lying pale on a bed, wires like vines across her chest. Daniel holding her hand, whispering the lullaby they wrote together. Her lips barely moved as she mouthed the last line. "Promise me, don't shut the door." She died 12 minutes later. He had shut every door after that. Until Rhys. Evenings became their sanctuary. Rhys cooked, nothing fancy, just meals that filled the house with warmth, stews, cornbread, soft things that smelled like home. Daniel read Elijah's stories in a low voice, books that once sat unopened after Grace never took her first breath. The first time Rhys saw Daniel pick up one of those books, his hands shook. Just slightly. She didn't say anything. She just sat on the floor beside him. Their closeness wasn't a blaze. It was a slow build, like two hands finding each other in the dark without needing to be guided. A look held a second too long. A quiet laugh shared over spilled coffee. The night she leaned her head on his shoulder while Elijah slept between them. She didn't call it love. Neither did he. But it was becoming something. Something steady. Marissa, the attorney, visited often. The court date loomed closer. She was blunt. Ethan was pulling every string. But he'd made mistakes too, refusing to visit Elijah, public statements contradicting his legal claims, and his family's not-so-subtle classist remarks caught on record. Marissa flipped open a folder one night at the kitchen table. "We can win," she said, looking at Ree. "But you need to be ready. He'll try to break you on the stand." Ree swallowed. He already did. Daniel reached across the table, not to grab, not to claim, just to anchor. His fingers brushed hers. This time, she didn't flinch. Flashback. Ethan's face was beautiful in the worst way. Clean, composed, expensive. Rain poured. She'd been 8 months pregnant. "Ree, they will never accept you," Ethan had said, like he was stating the weather. "Then why am I here?" "Because I love you." But love isn't enough. Then it was never love. She had left that night soaked to the bone, feeling like the world had ended. Now, looking at Elijah cooing in his sleep, she realized. That night wasn't the end. It was the beginning. The first snow came early that year. They stood on the front steps wrapped in coats, Elijah bundled between them like a small sun. The street lights flickered gold on the wet pavement. Snowflakes melted into the leftover rain, a soft hush falling over everything. Ree watched Daniel watching Elijah. He had the look of a man seeing a door he'd sworn closed begin to open again. She whispered, "You'd be a good father." His breath caught like she'd hit a nerve. For a heartbeat, she regretted saying it. Then he said, "Lo, I used to dream of it. Before." The silence between them wasn't empty. It was full of grief, hope, something unnamed. Weeks folded into each other. Ree got stronger. She found a new part-time nursing position at a community clinic, just 3 days a week. Daniel helped rearrange his driving schedule around her shifts. They moved like a team without needing to say the word. Elijah started smiling. Real smiles. The kind that pulled the corners of his cheeks and made the whole room lighter. Daniel was the first person he ever reached for besides her. Something inside Ree shifted when she saw that. Not jealousy. Not fear. Just quiet gratitude. Flashback. Years after the trial, Ree waiting outside the gates of the correctional facility. Rain again. Marjorie walking out, older, thinner, holding nothing but a plastic bag and a folded photograph. Ree at graduation. Her mother's voice cracking as she said, "I knew you'd build something better." At the time, Ree didn't believe her. Now she did. 2 nights before the custody hearing, Ree found Daniel on the balcony again. The sky was dark, rain drizzling lightly. She stepped outside with a blanket draped over her shoulders. "Elijah's asleep," she whispered. "Good," Daniel said. "He'll need it." They stood in silence for a long while. Finally, Ree said, "I'm scared." He turned to her, his voice quiet but unwavering. "You should be. This is big. But fear isn't failure." Rain tapped against the railing. She looked at him, really looked at him. At the man who picked her up from the steps, who held Elijah when her hands shook too hard, who never once made her feel like she owed him anything for it. "Daniel," she said softly, "thank you." He stepped closer, just enough that their shoulders touched under the blanket. No confessions. No declarations. Just shared warmth against a storm. Flashback. Daniel in a thrift suit. Elise laughing as they danced barefoot on damp grass. Rain had fallen earlier that day, but the sky had cleared just enough to let the sun out for their first dance. She'd whispered, "Even if it rains forever, we'll be okay." He had believed her. He hadn't believed anyone since. Until now. The night before court, Ree tucked Elijah into his crib and sat on the floor with the folded photograph. The lake house. The promises. The lies. She unfolded it one last time. Traced the image of Ethan's hand over her belly. Then she tore it cleanly down the middle. The rain outside rose to a soft hum, as if the world itself exhaled with her. Downstairs, Daniel sat at the kitchen table, staring at an old photograph of Elise. He slipped it back into the drawer. Not out of forgetting. Out of making room. The courthouse smelled of wet umbrellas and stale air. Rain drummed a relentless rhythm against the high-arched windows, the same rain that had been there the night Ree collapsed on the Cole mansion steps. Back then, it had felt like a verdict. Today, it felt like a witness. Ree sat on the wooden bench outside courtroom 3B, hands clenched around Elijah's small blue blanket. Daniel sat beside her, not hovering, just present, the way he always was. His right hand rested loosely on the bench between them, his knuckles white but steady. The courtroom doors were still closed. Beyond them waited Ethan. Lawyers. A judge who'd already read too many case files. A fight that would dig up everything she had worked so hard to bury. She could hear the rain faint through the glass, steady like a heartbeat. It reminded her of that first night. The steps, the door closing, the cold, and Daniel, the sound of his boots against wet stone, the way he'd carried her without asking for permission or praise. The bailiff opened the doors. Cole versus Owens. Parties may enter. She stood. Her legs trembled, but they moved. The courtroom was smaller than she expected. Less cinematic than all the court shows she'd watched as a teenager. Just plain wooden benches, a tired judge, and the weight of people deciding your life without knowing it. Ethan was already seated at the petitioner's table. He wore a tailored charcoal suit. Not a hair out of place. He looked exactly the way she remembered him, immaculate, polished, unreachable. But something about him was colder now, like the perfection had calcified. His lawyer, a man with a voice like sandpaper, nodded at her like she was a problem to be solved. Marissa touched Ree's elbow gently, grounding her. Daniel sat behind her in the gallery, silent. He wasn't here as a savior. He was here as her witness. The judge read the formalities, and then Ethan's lawyer stood. Words like stable household, financial security, family legacy filled the room, smooth and heavy. He spoke of opportunity, elite education, legacy. He didn't speak of Elijah as a child, but as an heir. Ethan's gaze remained fixed on the judge, not on her. Marissa rose. Her voice was calm but sharp. She spoke of Ree's years as a nurse, of her clean record, of Elijah's thriving health, of what care actually looks like when it isn't polished into press releases. Then she paused. Your Honor, this isn't about wealth. It's about who showed up. Ethan finally took the stand. He told the story he wanted the court to hear. He had been blindsided by Ree's family background. He had needed time to think. He had always intended to be involved. The lies were smooth, practiced. She had once loved that voice. Now, every word landed like glass splintering. Then it was her turn. She walked to the witness stand slowly, clutching the blue blanket in her lap. Her throat was dry, but she didn't look at Ethan. She looked at the judge, at herself, at the rain sliding down the window behind the bench. Ms. Owens, Marissa said softly, can you tell the court what happened the night your son was born? The memory was carved into her bones. She didn't need a script. He shut the door, she said simply. The courtroom went still. I was 9 months pregnant, she continued. And when his family found out about my mother's past, not mine, hers, they told him I wasn't good enough. And he agreed. He told me to leave. And when I went into labor on the steps of his house, he didn't open the door. Ethan shifted in his seat. Ree's hands shook, but her voice did not. I could have died there, she said. My son could have too. But someone else opened the door. Who? Marissa asked. Ree's eyes moved, not to Ethan, but to Daniel. He sat in the gallery, shoulders square, eyes steady on hers. Daniel Rourke, she said. His driver. Not a billionaire. Not family. Just a man who saw me on the ground and chose to help. The opposing lawyer jumped in. Miss Owens, no one is questioning the circumstances of the birth. But the judge raised a hand. Let her finish. Ree took a breath. Rain tapped against the window in time with her heartbeat. Ethan didn't call. He didn't visit. He didn't ask about his son until lawyers were involved. I built Elijah's world from nothing but what I could give him. A roof. Warmth. Arms that didn't let go in the rain. The words came out clean and quiet. Not a plea. A truth. And I'll keep doing that, she added softly. Because he's not a legacy. He's my son. The judge leaned back. Ethan's lawyer launched into objections, technicalities, inheritance claims, legacy arguments. But the air in the room had shifted. Everyone had heard it. The door had shut that night, and who opened it would never be forgotten. Daniel was called next. His testimony was brief, clear, unvarnished. He told the judge what he saw, Ree on the steps, bleeding, alone. He didn't embellish. He didn't posture. He just spoke like a man telling a truth that didn't need to be pretty to matter. I lost my wife in childbirth, he said quietly. I wasn't going to lose someone else to silence. For the first time, Ethan looked at him. There was a flicker of something like shame. But shame too late is just an echo. After hours of arguments and recesses and legal choreography, the judge returned. His voice was tired, but there was steel beneath it. This court finds that the best interest of the child lies with his mother, Ms. Owens. Full custody granted to the respondent. The words fell like the first crack of sunlight through rain. Ethan inhaled sharply. Marissa exhaled. Daniel didn't move. Ree's fingers tightened around the blue blanket. It was done. Ethan caught her in the hallway after the hearing. His voice was softer now, stripped of lawyers and strategy. "Ree," he said, "I made a mistake." She turned slowly. Rain streaked the tall courthouse windows behind him. "No," she said quietly. "You made a choice." He flinched. "You left your child in the rain," she continued. "Someone else found us a home." There was no anger left. Just truth. She walked away without looking back. The rain had stopped by the time she stepped outside. The air smelled of wet stone and new beginnings. Daniel stood by the steps, Elijah cradled against his chest under a small umbrella. The baby's small fingers were curled around the fabric of Daniel's jacket, his breathing even and warm. For a second, Ree just stood there, watching. The way Daniel looked at Elijah, not as something fragile he might lose again, but as something he had chosen to protect, made the world feel less sharp. She walked toward them. Slowly. No more running. No more collapsing on steps. "I told you we'd fight," Daniel said softly. "You didn't promise we'd win," she replied. He smiled. "No. But I stayed." She took Elijah in her arms. The clouds overhead broke open just enough for a faint drizzle to fall. A few drops landed on her face, warm against her skin. She tilted her head back, letting the rain touch her. The first time it rained, she had been left. This time, she wasn't alone. They walked together down the courthouse steps. People hurried past, holding newspapers over their heads. But she and Daniel didn't rush. They stood in the rain like it was theirs. Ree pressed Elijah against her chest. Daniel reached out, not to claim her, not to fix her, just to take her free hand. She let him. Final flashback. Spring. The lake. Ethan's hand on her belly. Laughter she thought would last forever. The image flickered like old film, then dissolved. And in its place, a new image, real, unposed. Daniel's arm around her shoulders, Elijah between them, rain falling soft. "Forever isn't promised," she whispered to herself. "It's chosen." Daniel looked at her. "What?" She smiled faintly. "Nothing." They stepped out into the rain, and for once, it didn't feel like the world was ending. It felt like the beginning. Symbolic closing image. Rain drizzling softly over three figures on courthouse steps. The sound of Elijah's breath against her heart. A lullaby, the same one her mother sang, humming low as the photograph of the lake house finally fades from memory. No grand speeches. No perfect fairy tales. Just quiet, earned peace. The rain returned on Elijah's first birthday. Not a storm. Just a soft drizzle, the kind that kissed the windows instead of pounding them. Ree stood on the small porch of Daniel's brownstone, a paper lantern in one hand and a lopsided cake balanced in the other. Inside, a few friends from the clinic filled the house with chatter. Marissa had brought cupcakes. Daniel had burned the first batch of cinnamon rolls and refused to admit it. Elijah sat on the living room floor, surrounded by blocks and a stuffed bear with one eye missing. He wasn't the fragile, blinking newborn she'd once held against her chest. He was a storm in a toddler's body, loud, curious, alive. Daniel knelt beside him, pretending to lose a block tower battle. Elijah shrieked with the kind of joy that cracked open quiet rooms. Ree leaned against the doorframe and just watched. A year ago, she'd walked into this house bleeding and scared, with nothing but a hospital bag and a child she didn't know how to raise alone. She'd expected pity. Instead, Daniel gave her something rarer. Space. Space to breathe. Space to grow roots again. She stepped outside. The rain smelled like wet brick and lilacs from the neighbor's yard. Daniel followed a moment later, Elijah perched on his shoulders, hands clutching his hair like reins. "He's getting heavy," Daniel said, laughing softly. "That's your fault," she teased. "You feed him too well." Elijah squealed at the sound of her voice, his little fingers reaching for her. She pressed her lips to his palm, warm and damp from the rain. Daniel's gaze lingered on her a little longer than usual. Not like a man asking for something. Like a man who'd found his place. For a long time, Ree had wondered if love after pain could ever feel soft. Not grand, not thunderous. Just safe. She had her answer now. It was standing beside her in the rain, holding their son. Later that night, when everyone had gone home and the house was finally quiet, Daniel sat at the piano tucked in the corner of the living room. It hadn't been played in years. Elijah slept upstairs. Ree lay on the couch, half wrapped in a blanket. Daniel pressed a few hesitant keys. The melody wasn't perfect. It cracked, like old wood bending in the wind. But she recognized it. The lullaby. The one her mother had sung. The one she had reclaimed. He played it slowly, carefully, like it was something sacred. Ree closed her eyes. The sound filled the house like soft light. And for the first time in years, the rain outside didn't remind her of everything she'd lost. It reminded her of everything she'd built. The letter was tucked inside a worn envelope with Marjorie's handwriting on the front. Ree found it one winter morning, sorting through an old box in the attic. Her hands shook as she opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded carefully, smelling faintly of cedar and old perfume. The ink had faded a little, but the words were still strong. Ree, if you're reading this, I'm somewhere I can't be what you need anymore. But I know storms. I know how they sound when they're about to break. I know how they sound after. And I know this, they don't last forever. People will leave, baby. Doors will close. But storms aren't the end. They are the clearing. You are stronger than my mistakes. Stronger than every whisper that will follow you. One day, you will hold something that is yours. Not because someone gave it to you. Because you built it. Because you stayed. And when the rain falls, don't hide. Let it touch you. Remember me. But don't stop walking forward. Love, Mama. Ree pressed the paper to her chest, and the sob came quietly, like something too heavy to name out loud. Daniel didn't ask questions when he found her sitting on the attic floor with tears running down her face. He just knelt behind her, wrapped his arms around her, and held her. That night, she placed the letter in a small wooden box on her nightstand. Inside it, a folded hospital bracelet, the torn photograph from the lake house, a new photograph of Elijah asleep on Daniel's chest, a past she'd survived, a future she'd chosen. She whispered into the dark, to the woman who had raised her, to the rain that had watched everything. I made it, Mama. Outside, rain tapped against the window, soft, steady, like applause meant only for her.